had just finished tucking Emily into bed when the knock came, sharp and insistent, like a warning siren cutting through the quiet of our home. My first thought was that it must be a neighbor, maybe someone needing help, because who else would disturb us at this hour? I glanced at Michael, my 8-year-old, still coloring at the kitchen table, his crayons scattered in a chaotic rainbow. My stomach twisted, a flicker of unease crawling up my spine. Something about that knock didn't feel right, but I tried to shake it off. I opened the door cautiously, expecting the familiar face of Mrs. Calder from next door or someone delivering a package. Instead, I came face to face with Vanessa, my husband's mistress. She stood there, hands on her hips, a smug, infuriatingly confident smile on her lips, her designer bag slung over one shoulder as if she owned the entire street. My chest tightened instantly, a rush of adrenaline flooding my veins, sharp and cold. My heart thumped so hard I thought Michael might hear it and come running. "Hello, Samantha," Vanessa said, her voice smooth and deliberate, dripping with mock politeness. Her gaze swept over the living room, landing briefly on Michael's coloring pages, and then flicked to Emily, who peeked cautiously from the bedroom doorway. "I'm here to discuss your situation." I blinked, confusion and disbelief swirling together like a storm. "Situation," I repeated, my voice steadier than I felt, though my hands gripped the doorframe like it was a lifeline. Michael looked up at me, wide-eyed, sensing the tension before he could even understand it. Vanessa didn't answer immediately. She just smiled. The kind of smile that made your blood boil because it wasn't friendly, it was deliberate, controlling. She took a step forward, uninvited, and I instinctively shifted back, putting the door slightly between us. "Your husband and I have come to an agreement," she said, as if she were delivering a weather report instead of the verbal equivalent of a bomb. "And that agreement means you and the children will need to move out of this house." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. Move out? Move out of my own home. My stomach lurched violently, a mix of nausea and fury threatening to overtake me. I swallowed hard, gripping the door so tightly my knuckles turned white. "Excuse me?" My voice shook, though I forced it into a semblance of control. "You're joking, right?" Vanessa tilted her head, the epitome of calm arrogance. "I'm never joking. This house, well, it's going to be mine. David and I have plans. It's really quite simple. You'll just need to find somewhere else. Preferably, sooner rather than later." I felt my knees weaken. The words made no logical sense, but the confidence in her tone made it feel real, terrifyingly real. My mind raced. What could I possibly say? What law, what right, what argument could stop this woman from claiming what was mine? The room felt suddenly small, the walls pressing in, and I caught Michael staring at me with an expression that mixed fear and confusion. Emily had stepped closer, her small hand brushing against my leg. My maternal instincts flared like fire, sharp and immediate. I would not let her threaten my children. Not here, not ever. "You can't just," I began, then faltered. The words felt absurd, hollow. I realized that Vanessa didn't need permission or approval. Her confidence alone was a weapon, a threat. She wanted me to feel powerless. And I did, even as my anger flared hot enough to make my ears ring. Vanessa echoed, letting the word hang in the air, playful yet predatory. "Oh, Samantha, don't pretend this isn't happening. Don't act surprised. David and I have been planning this for months. I've been patient, letting things settle, but patience has limits." Her gaze flicked to the children again, and I felt a cold shiver of dread. She was counting on my fear, counting on the instinct to protect, to shield, to obey. I took a deep, shuddering breath, forcing myself to stand taller, though every muscle in my body screamed in protest. "You have no right," I said finally, voice firmer now, laced with a protective edge I hadn't expected to find in myself so quickly. "This is my home. My children live here. David lives here. You don't just get to show up and make demands." Vanessa laughed softly, the sound sharp and cruel. "Right? But you see, Samantha, it's really just a matter of perspective. David and I, well, we both see the house differently now, and it wouldn't be fair for him to live in one place while I live in another. It's inconvenient, really, for all of us." She paused, letting her words sink in. "So, you'll need to move. It's really quite simple." I felt my hands tremble, the edges of my vision going pink as my fury and panic mingled. How could someone be so audacious, so entitled? She was demanding my life, my children, my homeland, all with a calm, practiced smile. I wanted to scream, to throw her out, to call the police, to do anything that might undo the surreal audacity of the moment. But most of all, I wanted to protect Michael and Emily from the fear in my own eyes. I can't just leave," I said, my voice steadier now, strengthened by instinctive resolve. You're delusional if you think I will let you intimidate us out of our home. You have no legal claim here, and you have no right to speak to my children that way. Vanessa's smile didn't falter. Legal claims? Oh, Samantha, you misunderstand. This isn't about law. This is about what's right. With David and I, the leave is right. And really, you should consider what's best for the children. Staying here? It's not healthy for anyone. I felt my chest tighten as anger and fear collided. How dare she lecture me about my own children? I glanced at Michael, whose fingers were tightening around his crayons, and at Emily, who clung to my leg nervously. I realized, with a cold clarity, that this wasn't just an attack on MIT, was an attempt to destabilize my family, to make us question our own home, our own lives, and I would not let her succeed. You are not taking my children, I said, my voice rising, firm, unwavering. And you are not taking my home. You are standing on my doorstep, threatening me and my family, and you will leave. Now? Vanessa tilted her head, lips curving in a smile that was both amused and condescending. I see, she said softly. You're feisty. I'll give you that. But feisty doesn't change facts, Samantha. You'll see. Eventually, you'll understand. Resistance is tiring, isn't it? Her words lingered, poisonous, but I refused to let them penetrate further. I stepped slightly forward, placing myself between her and the children. My chest was heaving, my heart hammering, adrenaline coursing through me. I felt an unfamiliar, fierce strength, a primal determination to protect what was mine. I would not cower. I would not submit. Vanessa finally stepped back, still smiling, still radiating confidence, as if she had already won something by simply showing up. I closed the door slowly, my hands trembling, and leaned against it, my body shaking with a mixture of rage and fear. The children huddled close to me, eyes wide, seeking reassurance I barely felt I could give. But I would give it. I had to. I pressed my hands to my face, inhaling shakily. I would not let her destroy us. I would not allow my fear to dictate our lives. This was my home, my sanctuary, and my family, and I would fight to protect it, no matter what it took. The moment was a turning point, sharp and undeniable. I realized that this wasn't just an outrageous encounter, was the beginning of a battle. And for the first time in a long time, I understood that survival, dignity, and justice required more than outrage. They required strategy, patience, and courage. I looked at the children, their small faces trusting and innocent, and made a silent promise. Vanessa had knocked on my door, demanded we leave, and assumed I would be powerless. But she had no idea who she was dealing with. I would not only survive this, I would reclaim our home, our lives, and our sense of safety. The next morning, the sun rose like any other day, golden and calm, but inside me, the storm raged. I hadn't slept well. My mind had looped over Vanessa's words, her smug expression, the way she had stepped across my threshold like she owned the place. I stared at Michael eating his cereal, Emily twirling a strand of hair nervously, and felt the weight of responsibility pressing down. I couldn't let fear dictate our lives, not for a second. But every fiber of my being screamed that we were under siege. David's absence that morning felt heavier than usual. He had left early, probably claiming a long workday, and I imagined Vanessa already whispering into his ear, feeding him her version of events. I clenched my fists, teeth grinding. I had tried to talk to him once, that night after she left, but his response had been maddeningly passive. She's just trying to push boundaries. Don't worry about it, he'd said, rubbing his temple as if my panic were a minor inconvenience rather than a direct threat to our home. Don't worry about it. The words replayed in my head like a slap. I knew, in that moment, that I couldn't rely on him. Not now, not ever. That realization was terrifying, but it also ignited something dangerous in me, a determination, sharp and precise. I would have to be the one to protect our home and our children. I would have to confront Vanessa on my own terms, and I would have to outsmart her. By mid-morning, I decided to go outside, ostensibly to check the mailbox, but really to observe. Vanessa was there, tending her garden, perfectly coiffed, a picture of ease and entitlement. She glanced up, spotted me, and gave a wave that was casual, but knowing. I felt my stomach tighten. She wanted a reaction. She craved dominance, and I would not give it. Not yet. I pretended calm, nodding politely, and turned to check my mailbox. Inside, I could hear her shifting, humming softly, arranging flowers in the sunlight. Every movement she made seemed deliberate, an unspoken statement that she had already staked claim to our shared space. I felt my hands ball into fists at my sides. Each infuriating smile, each casual gesture, was a challenge I couldn't ignore. Over the next few days, the pattern became clear. Vanessa would appear at odd times, sometimes under the guise of casual neighborly visits, sometimes simply loitering near our driveway, chatting with delivery people, making small talk with anyone who would listen. Every interaction was carefully calculated. She laughed too loudly, leaned too close, and made comments that were designed to provoke discomfort. One afternoon, she stopped by while Michael was building a Lego set on the living room floor. "He's so smart," she said, sweeping him up in a patronizing glance. "David told me all about him. You must be so proud, Samantha." I forced a smile, but inside, my anger simmered. She was invading our lives, claiming attention, and positioning herself as part of our family without any acknowledgement of morality, decency, or truth. My chest felt tight, my jaw sore from clenching. I felt small, trapped, and yet paradoxically alive with the pulse of outrage. I began taking meticulous notes. Everything Vanessa said, everything she did, I logged in my mind and in a notebook I kept tucked away. She had routines, morning walks, precise lunch hours, casual strolls when she knew David would be out. She had habits, certain words she liked to repeat, small boasts she thought were clever, little displays of entitlement that revealed her character. Observation became my weapon. Knowledge became my armor. At night I found myself lying awake, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts racing. The fear for my children was always there, coiled tightly around my ribs, but it had transformed into a different kind of energy. Anger, strategy, determination, it all merged into a single, focused drive. I couldn't predict everything, but I could learn, adapt, and act. And I would. David, still unaware of the depths of Vanessa's manipulations, continued to brush off my concerns. His obliviousness only fueled my frustration. I imagined him smiling at her at work, taking her calls with an easy familiarity, while I remained vigilant at home, defending the children from a threat that should never have existed. The imbalance was infuriating, and yet it clarified one essential truth: I was on my own. Vanessa's next move was audacious, almost theatrical. She showed up at our front door, her pregnancy beginning to show, dressed in bright colors, her designer bag swinging lightly. "Samantha," she said, voice smooth, eyes bright, "I thought I'd stop by. It's such a shame David's busy today, isn't it? But I thought I could entertain the children. Don't you think they'd enjoy some company?" Michael and Emily froze, glancing nervously at me. I felt my pulse spike, my muscles tightening. She was trying to manipulate them, to insinuate herself into our family life, to blur the line between intruder and caregiver. I had to act. Calmly, deliberately, I stepped forward. "Thank you, Vanessa, but we'll pass. The children need their routine. You'll understand, I hope." She tilted her head, a faint crease between her brows. Her smile didn't falter, but there was a flash of something irritation. Disbelief, maybe the first crack in her perfect facade. "Oh, Samantha, don't be so rigid," she said lightly. "They'd enjoy it. You know they'd enjoy it." I felt the rage simmering beneath my calm, and I forced it down. This was not the time for confrontation. Observation first. Planning second. Patience always. "I'm sure they would," I said gently. "But tonight, it's just us. Thank you for understanding." She lingered for a moment, the subtle pause a test of dominance, then finally nodded and left, her steps deliberate, eyes flicking to David's absence as if reminding me of my vulnerability. I closed the door, sliding against it, hands trembling, chest tight. My children clung to me instinctively, and I hugged them both, whispering reassurances that I barely felt myself. The days that followed became a careful dance. Vanessa's appearances were frequent but calculated, her provocations subtle but persistent. She asked about our routines, our meals, casually inquired about school projects, offered unsolicited advice to Michael and Emily, all while smiling like a queen surveying her domain. Each encounter left me drained, frustrated, and furious, but also more focused. Every smile, every boast, every intrusion revealed more about her arrogance, more about the mistakes she would inevitably make if I watched closely. I began to feel a strange, electric mixture of fear and determination. Fear for my children, fear of losing the stability we had built, fear of being bullied out of our home. But determination flared brighter, fueled by outrage and the clear recognition of what needed to happen. I would not allow Vanessa to dictate our lives, to erase our presence from a place that belonged to us. I would survive this, and I would fight back. I spent nights observing, planning, and quietly imagining small victories. Imagining her overconfidence collapsing under the weight of her own I imagined reclaiming our space, restoring order, and demonstrating to her, to David, and most importantly to my children, that home was ours. I had reached a point where survival was no longer enough. I wanted justice. I wanted control. And slowly, quietly, that determination began to crystallize into a plan. By the end of that week, I realized that I couldn't remain passive any longer. Each day, Vanessa's presence gnawed at the edges of my sanity. Her confidence, her entitlement, her smug assumption that she could dictate my life. She had no right to my home, my children, my family. Yet there she was, walking into our lives with the casual arrogance of someone who believed the world owed her everything. And David, he remained oblivious, detached, unwilling to confront the uncomfortable truth. I remember the night vividly. I had tucked Emily into bed and kissed Michael's forehead, listening as their soft breaths filled the room. Once I stepped into the kitchen, I let myself sink into a chair, hands covering my face. My chest heaved, mind racing. I had been scared, exhausted, furious, but that night, fear and exhaustion gave way to a quiet, simmering resolve. Vanessa would not win. She could not. And I would prove it. The first step was observation. I started documenting everything, meticulously. Times she left her house, where she went, when she returned, her interactions with neighbors, her phone calls, even the little habits that seemed inconsequential. I noticed her arrogance in every gesture, the way she tossed her hair, the faint smirk when she thought no one was looking, the way she assumed I would always step aside. Each of these moments became a piece of a puzzle I intended to complete. I also paid attention to her overconfidence. Vanessa assumed she could manipulate David, me, our children, and anyone who crossed her path. She believed that her charm and assertiveness rendered her untouchable. That assumption was her greatest vulnerability. I noted every slip, every boast, every careless revelation. She had a need to be admired, to be seen as clever and powerful. That need would be the thread I would pull to unravel her. I began imagining the plan in fragments. First, I would need to protect my children emotionally. I couldn't let Vanessa intimidate them or make them feel unsafe. I started creating small routines, little rituals that reinforced their sense of security. Movie nights, baking afternoons, bedtime stories repeated exactly the same way. The goal was twofold: shield them from Vanessa's manipulations and prepare a foundation from which I could act without fear of collateral emotional damage. Next, I had to understand Vanessa's psychology. She thrived on control, on attention, on subtle domination. I reviewed every interaction in my mind, piecing together what made her confident and what made her falter. Her arrogance was tied to perception. She believed she could bend reality to suit her desires, and that belief made her reckless. That recklessness was my opportunity. I began constructing scenarios in my head, conversations, encounters, situations where she would reveal too much, make herself vulnerable, and allow the truth of her audacity to shine through. I also needed leverage. I started keeping records, discreet notes, even snapshots of moments when her behavior crossed lines. Nothing illegal, nothing that could be construed as harassment, just evidence of entitlement, intrusion, and manipulative behavior. Each observation became a tool, a weapon I could deploy strategically when the time was right. I knew that confrontation alone would not suffice. I needed precision, subtlety, and undeniable clarity. One afternoon, Vanessa came over again, wearing that same infuriatingly smug smile. "Samantha," she said, voice casual, "I thought I'd bring by some treats for the kids. They must be hungry." She looked at Michael and Emily expectantly. My first instinct was to refuse, to slam the door. But I held myself back. Patience, observation, strategy. "Thank you, Vanessa," I said evenly, smiling in a way that didn't give away my true emotions. "But they've just eaten. Maybe another time." I could see the brief flash of irritation cross her face. She tried to mask it with a laugh, but I had already cataloged it. Every reaction mattered. Every moment was part of the blueprint I was constructing. She lingered longer than usual, chatting casually about our neighborhood, about David, about herself. I let her talk, prompting subtly, asking questions that encouraged each boast, each claim, each attempt at domination, I stored away. I noticed the way she flinched at my measured responses, the way her confidence wavered when I asked pointed but polite questions about her boundaries, her plans, her assumptions. She was starting to slip, though she didn't know it yet. At night, after the children were asleep, I reviewed my mental notes, replaying interactions like a director rehearsing a critical scene. I refined my plan, adding contingencies, thinking through every possible reaction Vanessa might have. I imagined the eventual confrontation, not a shouting match, not a dramatic fight, but a careful, strategic exposure of her arrogance, executed with precision. The satisfaction I felt was a quiet, almost frightening calm, a stark contrast to the chaos she had introduced into our lives. David remained mostly unaware, brushing off my concerns, yet his detachment had an unintended benefit. It forced me to rely entirely on my own judgment, sharpened my focus, and revealed how capable I was when pushed to the edge. I realized, in those long nights of planning and observation, that this wasn't just about reclaiming our home, it was about reclaiming my confidence, my autonomy, and my authority over my own life. Then came the pivotal moment, the trigger that made my plan feel urgent and inevitable. Vanessa made an unguarded comment during a casual encounter outside, boasting about a scheme she had suggested to David regarding the house. It was careless, revealing, and exactly the leverage I had been seeking. I noticed the slight hesitation in her tone when she realized I was paying attention. That moment crystallized everything. Her hubris had blinded her, and her next steps would only make her mistakes more apparent. From that day on, my focus sharpened. I watched, I waited, every interaction was deliberate. I prompted her to reveal information, to assert dominance, to make her confidence evident to witnesses and to herself. I controlled the timing, the setting, and the audience, knowing that her self-exposure would become the key to reclaiming control. My fear had transformed into something else entirely, a precise, patient resolve. I reminded myself nightly why I was doing this, not for cruelty, not for vengeance alone, but for protection, for justice, for dignity. I thought about Michael and Emily, their trust in me, their need for stability. I thought about the home that Vanessa had audaciously claimed as her own. I thought about David's inaction and how it had forced me to be stronger, smarter, more vigilant than I had ever imagined. By the end of that week, I was ready. Not to confront her yet, but to act strategically, to turn her arrogance into her undoing. Observation had become my weapon. Patience had become my ally. And for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of exhilaration. A sense of power I hadn't known I could wield in the face of such audacity. Vanessa believed she had already won. She had no idea how carefully, quietly, I had prepared to reclaim everything she thought she could take. The morning I decided to act, the house felt different. Not quieter, not calmer, but alert, like it was holding its breath with me. I packed the kids' lunches, braided Emily's hair, reminded Michael twice about his spelling test, all while my mind moved through the plan with surgical precision. I kissed them goodbye and watched the bus pull away, forcing myself to breathe normally. This was not the day for hesitation. This was the day for execution. Vanessa made it easy. She always did. Her confidence demanded an audience, and I made sure she had one. I invited a few neighbors over that afternoon under the harmless excuse of coffee and casual conversation. People who liked to talk, people who listened, people who noticed things. I didn't say her name once, but I timed it carefully, knowing she would appear the moment she sensed attention nearby. She never could resist being seen. Right on cue, she strolled over, sunglasses perched on her head, belly prominent, expression smug. "Oh, I didn't realize you were hosting," she said lightly, already stepping inside. No invitation. No hesitation. The neighbors exchanged glances. I smiled, warm and "Just a few friends catching up," I replied. "You're welcome to join us." I watched her relax, mistaking my calm for surrender. She talked, of course she did, about David, about plans, about how complicated things were when people didn't know when to step aside gracefully. Her words slid into the room like oil, smooth and slick. I asked questions softly, the way you do when you want someone to keep going. "That must be stressful," I said. "How are you managing all of that?" She preened under the attention, basking in her own narrative. Then she crossed the line, boldly, publicly. "Well," she said with a laugh, glancing around the room, "David and I agree it's best if things change soon. This house just isn't suitable for shared custody situations." The room went still. Someone inhaled sharply. I felt my pulse thrum in my ears, but I kept my face neutral. This was it. The moment she thought she could claim authority, I set my cup down slowly. "That's interesting," I said, "because David hasn't mentioned any legal changes to me, or any agreements, or any custody discussions." My voice was calm, clear. Vanessa's smile twitched. "Just barely." "Oh, we've discussed it," she said quickly. "Privately?" "Of course," I replied. "Would you mind explaining how you're involved in decisions about a house you don't own?" The question landed hard. A neighbor shifted uncomfortably. Vanessa laughed too fast. Well, David intends isn't the same as has, I interrupted gently. And intentions don't give you the right to tell my children to leave their home. The word children changed the air. I saw it register. I saw judgment flicker across familiar faces. Vanessa's posture stiffened. She wasn't used to resistance. That sounded reasonable. She recovered quickly, trying to regain control. I'm just thinking about what's best for everyone, she said, especially the kids. That did it. Heat surged up my spine. I leaned forward slightly, meeting her eyes. Then you should stop threatening them, I said quietly. And stop showing up uninvited. And stop pretending you have authority you don't. Silence. Thick and heavy, Vanessa's face flushed, anger bleeding through the cracks. You're being dramatic, she snapped. This doesn't need to be public. I nodded. You made it public when you knocked on my door and demanded my family leave. Gasps. Someone whispered, she did what? Vanessa froze. She stammered, trying to backpedal, but the damage was done. The image she'd curated shattered under the weight of her own words. I stood, not towering, not aggressive, just steady. This is my home, I said. My children live here. Any future decisions will be made legally, respectfully, and without intimidation. Vanessa's eyes darted around the room, searching for support. She found none. She grabbed her bag, muttering something about misunderstandings, about stress. I stepped aside and opened the door. I think it's best if you leave, I said calmly. She hesitated, then walked out, her shoulders rigid, her confidence in pieces. The aftermath was immediate and quiet. Neighbors stayed a few minutes longer, offering awkward reassurances, gentle support. I accepted it without explanation. I didn't need validation. The truth had spoken for itself. When the door finally closed behind the last guest, I exhaled fully for the first time in weeks. My hands shook, but my chest felt light. That evening, David came home tense. Vanessa called me. He said, she said you embarrassed her. I looked at him steadily. She threatened our children, I replied. In front of witnesses, his face drained of color. She told you to leave, he asked. I nodded. Something shifted then. He finally saw it. The next day, Vanessa avoided the house. The next week, she stopped appearing altogether. I heard through neighbors that her narrative had unraveled quickly, that people were asking questions she couldn't answer without revealing her entitlement. She had overplayed her hand, and everyone had seen it. When my children came home that afternoon, I hugged them tightly. Is everything okay? Michael asked. I smiled, brushing his hair back. Yes, I said. It is now. And for the first time since that knock on the door, I believed it. The house felt different after Vanessa finally stopped showing up. Quiet, yes, but not empty alive in a way that felt reclaimed. I walked through the rooms one morning, sunlight streaming across the living room floor, and noticed details I hadn't appreciated in weeks. The way Michael's drawings sprawled across the fridge, the small stack of books Emily had been reading, the faint scent of vanilla lingering from yesterday's baking. Our home had always been ours, but now it felt more secure, more vibrant, more ours than ever before. The kids noticed it too. Emily skipped down the stairs one morning, chattering about a new story she had written for school, her excitement spilling over. Michael was sprawled on the floor, building an elaborate Lego fortress, completely absorbed in his own world. I watched them, heart swelling with relief and pride. I realized that Vanessa hadn't just threatened our physical space, she had tried to unseat our sense of safety and belonging. And now that threat was gone, replaced by the steady, grounding presence of our family life. David had changed too, though slowly. He had witnessed the aftermath of Vanessa's humiliation, the moment when her arrogance had cracked under scrutiny, and it seemed to finally register. He approached our conversations differently, listening more carefully, asking questions, checking in, not enough to erase the past, but enough that I could feel him present, aware, and somewhat accountable. It was a fragile truce, but it mattered. He had been passive when he should have acted, but now he seemed to understand that protection of family wasn't optional. I noticed Vanessa only when she drove by. She would glance at our home, her expression carefully neutral, though I could imagine the frustration behind it. She had learned, perhaps too late, that intimidation and audacity only carry so far when faced with someone willing to stand firm and act deliberately. I didn't feel triumph over her anymore, just quiet satisfaction that she could no longer infiltrate our lives. The sense of control that had been stripped from me for months had returned, solid and unmistakable. With the immediate threat gone, I allowed myself to reflect on what I had endured. The fear, the anger, the sleepless nights, all of it had been transformative. I had discovered a depth of patience, focus, and strategic thinking I hadn't realized I possessed. I had learned to observe without reaction, to plan without panic, and to act with precision. And most importantly, I had learned to trust myself, even when the people closest to me had failed to do so. Life resumed its ordinary rhythm, but ordinary felt different. Each chore, each bedtime story, each school drop-off carried a quiet sense of empowerment. I had proven to myself that I could protect my children, my home, and my dignity without compromising my morals or losing control of my composure. The lessons I had learned weren't theoretical, they were etched into the very structure of my confidence. The way my hands moved, the way my voice carried calm authority. I also noticed subtle shifts in my children. Michael was braver now, speaking up more in school, asserting small decisions with confidence. Emily asked more questions, exploring her world without hesitation. I knew that my example, the calm, deliberate way I had defended our home, had given them a blueprint for resilience. Watching them grow in this way, free from Vanessa's shadow, gave me a sense of victory far deeper than I could have imagined. David and I began spending evenings together in a new way, not because the mistress was gone, but because I had reclaimed my space and demanded attention for the first time in months. We cooked meals together, helped the kids with homework, and spoke about plans for our family with clarity and purpose. The silence that had hung between us when Vanessa intruded slowly lifted, replaced by conversations that were honest, sometimes uncomfortable, but necessary. Our marriage wasn't perfect, but it had regained a measure of respect and presence it hadn't had before. The neighborhood changed too, subtly but perceptibly. The gossip that Vanessa had once tried to manipulate shifted. People who had admired her audacity now seemed wary, polite but cautious, no longer captivated by her bravado. I overheard snippets of conversation as neighbors spoke quietly among themselves. Disbelief, astonishment, judgment. It wasn't cruelty, it was the natural correction of a social balance that Vanessa had thought she could bend to her will. Watching it unfold from my own front porch felt oddly cathartic. I reflected often on why I had chosen strategy over confrontation. At first, I had been consumed by fear, panic, and fury. But I realized that brute force, shouting, or recklessness would have been ineffective and potentially damaging. Vanessa thrived on drama. She fed on emotional reactions. By controlling myself, by acting deliberately, I had forced her to reveal her flaws on her own terms. Justice had been achieved quietly, efficiently, and morally. There were moments when I allowed myself to feel the release fully. I would sit in the living room after the kids went to bed, glass of wine in hand, and replay the steps I had taken, the careful observation, the patient recording of habits, the small manipulations of social context that had led to her exposure. I smiled to myself, not out of cruelty, but out of relief and pride. I had reclaimed my home, my family, and my dignity without stooping to malice or losing my moral compass. Sometimes, I caught myself imagining Vanessa's face when she realized her influence was gone. But those thoughts were fleeting. I no longer needed to dwell on her humiliation. The important thing was the restoration of our lives, the security of my children, and the calm that had replaced weeks of tension. She had overstepped, and life had corrected it. I didn't need to gloat. The balance itself was sufficient. I also considered David, who had been passive and blind, and the lessons I had drawn about relying on others. I realized that my independence, my ability to act decisively, had been the true key. I had learned that empowerment doesn't come from waiting for someone else to act, it comes from knowing your own strength, trusting your judgment, and standing firm, even when the stakes are highest. That lesson was permanent, indelible, and deeply satisfying. The children thrived in the newfound stability. We organized weekends around shared activities, hikes, park visits, movie nights. Emily laughed freely. Michael debated imaginary Lego battles with gusto. And I reveled in the ordinary moments that had felt impossible under Vanessa's looming presence. Every laugh, every casual glance, every quiet evening together was a small victory, a reaffirmation that home was ours and would remain ours. Even on nights when I lay awake, reflecting on everything, I no longer felt the sting of fear. Instead, I felt strength, clarity, and resolution. I thought about the ordeal, the audacity of Vanessa, the negligence of David, the fear that had gripped me and recognized how far I had come. What had begun as terror and helplessness had become strategy, confidence, and action. I had turned adversity into empowerment. In the quiet moments, I also thought about justice. Not revenge in the petty sense, not cruelty, not humiliation, but justice in its truest form, restoration, balance, and the affirmation that boundaries must be respected. Vanessa had crossed the line, and life, through my careful action and persistence, had corrected it. That truth settled over me like a comforting warmth. One evening, as I tucked Emily in and kissed Michael's forehead, I realized that the house, our home, had never truly belonged to anyone else. Vanessa had tried to claim it, to rewrite reality with her entitlement and audacity. But I had reminded myself and her who the rightful inhabitants were. It was not about arrogance or malice. It was about truth, protection, and the relentless pursuit of justice for my family. I poured myself a cup of tea and stood by the window, watching the sun dip behind the trees. The neighborhood was quiet, ordinary, safe. Vanessa's house remained next door, but her influence had evaporated. David was present, attentive in his own way, and the children slept peacefully upstairs. For the first time in months, I felt a profound, unshakable peace. Life had returned to normal, but I had changed. I had learned patience, strategy, and the power of calm, deliberate action. I had discovered resilience I hadn't known existed, and most importantly, I had preserved the sanctuary of my home, the trust and safety of my children, and my own dignity. I was stronger, wiser, and quietly triumphant. And as the last rays of sunlight fell across our living room, I smiled softly, knowing that we had survived. We had prevailed, and justice subtle, precise, and irrevocable had been served.